see a lot of people online talk about the master of Japanese horror, and they all seem to point at Junji Ito as the pinnacle of the horror genre in the manga medium. While I do occasionally enjoy his work, it feels wrong to give him that title. He certainly helped to shape other artists such as Kago and Hanazawa, but I really don't think he himself is worthy of the title best. I'd like to posit this unpopular opinion. Ito's overrated, and Nakayama Masaaki is better. If you've never heard of Masaaki, do yourself a favor and pick up Fuan no Tane and just go to town. A good analogy I use to explain the differences to my horror-loving friends is that if Ito's standalone one-shots are a solid video, Masaaki is a well-crafted vine. Now, stay with me here. I know that a lot of people might not be crazy about this analogy, but let's follow it logically. Vine distilled joke videos to their core. Setup, punchline. Full stop. Masaaki distills horror to its core. Tension and fear. I might go back and reread The Hanging Balloons once every few years, but if I want a shot of dread right now, I go for Fuan no Tane and read 3 or 4 stories in a few minutes, and all of a sudden, I'm amped and I probably won't be sleeping easily that night. My biggest complaint with Ito's work is that his hyper-detailed drawings are often just gross to look at. If I see that thing from the window next door one more time, I'm gonna barf. There are a great amount of creatures in his work that are just plain unpleasant to look at, not because they're actually scary, but because they're just plain old yucky. Gore and body horror rank pretty low on my scare scale, a term I just made up. They're barely above jump scares, which aren't even really scares at all. Of course you're gonna have a tough time looking at something that's full of weeping sores. It's nasty, but it isn't actually scary. Masaaki, on the other hand, is the master of keeping a lovely aesthetic that is still incredibly off-putting and keeps his creatures in line with the general design of the humans. Masaaki's art excels at creating tension due to wide open spaces. It fosters a sense of isolation and dread, and makes you truly worry for the characters that are in these situations. These vast open spaces, such as classrooms or streets, are something that exist in our day-to-day life, but when presented through Masaaki's lens, are truly, truly unsettling. In addition to his gift when it comes to setting the stage of supernatural horror, he has a gift when it comes to drawing facial expressions that create a sense of unease in the reader. Even before characters learn that something supernatural might be afoot, their faces convey a sense of dread, even from something as simple as creeping on your crush after school. His art style might not carry the same visceral, gross-out impact that a lot of Ito's work does, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If Ito's bread and butter is yucky stuff, then Masaaki's is smushed face. He does it a lot, and each time it is incredibly unsettling, but it still invites further inspection, unlike Ito's work. Ito seems to want you to turn the page as soon as possible. The longer you look, the more gross stuff you're going to find. Compare that to Masaaki, who, in complete indifference to the long-standing horror traditions of don't let them stare at the monster, really wants you to take a good, hard look at just how off his horrors are. It's like they've been made by a creature that has only heard about humans, but has never actually seen one. Not quite Uncanny Valley, but certainly trying to be as close to us as they can be. If my one complaint with Ito is that he's incredibly guilty of reusing the same general concept of, oh look how gross this thing is, for his horror, I would have to fairly critique Masaaki in the same way. Once you really dig into the body of his work, you'll come to understand that he too reuses many ideas. Specifically the something's peeping on you scare. This is all well and good because they're not really jump scares. It has a solid buildup and a solid reveal, but he does it a lot, and I'd be being disingenuous if I didn't point that out. Here's the biggest sell though, in my opinion. Ito does cosmic horror very, very well. Saying he doesn't would also be a lie. He is at his absolute best when he's teasing at things just beyond the veil of our reality. He's better than Lovecraft at it, who also isn't even really that great. Lovecraft's really all about othering, which is pretty lame when you start to put those pieces together, and Ito doesn't really suffer from that. His cosmic horrors are more based on ideas, like in Uzumaki, and concepts, not thinly veiled metaphors for immigrants. But Masaaki isn't someone who often, if ever, dips into the realm of cosmic horror, a genre that I find pretty bland most of the time. His nightmares hit much closer to home. They have a very personal feel thanks to the care that he takes with something as simple as dating and placing most of his works on the first page. They revolve around things that could happen to anyone, which is a key concept in most Japanese horror. A child stays late at school and encounters something wholly inhuman. Someone spots a person outside in the street and offhandedly waves at them. A noise catches someone's attention and suddenly they are wishing that it hadn't. It's all something that could happen to anyone at any time. It might even be happening to someone near you right now and you'd never know to look. It's in the corner of your eye and the back of your mind. You'll never see the awful thing that's about to occur, but you'll see the moment it begins, and that makes it so much worse. There's no need to dwell on what's about to happen, because our inference of what we think is going to happen in each specific case is so much worse than anything Ito or Masaaki could produce on paper. These urban legends are so scary because you could just end up in them without warning. You might spot a person acting strange, but your instinct wouldn't be to assume that it's a monster, and by the time you'd act, it might already be too late for you. Ito's characters just accept the strangeness that's happening to them, even if it's giant floating heads that look like people in their town for whatever reason. And that really pulls me out of it. Masaakis don't have anything to be suspicious about until they very suddenly do. Unlike the people in The Window Next Door who end the story only thinking about moving somewhere else, where any sane person would be in Portugal by that last panel, Masaaki's characters logically wouldn't leave because nothing so truly strange has actually occurred. Any sane person would see the house next door erupting in warts and growing towards their home and be like, oh yeah, we gotta go. The fact that they don't is what ruins Ito's horror for me. They're just all so stupid. Though I suppose that surrealism is probably the same thing that really does it for some people. So let's wrap this up. Horror is a deceptively simple genre that is actually incredibly difficult to execute well. That's because different things scare different people. It's okay to like Ito. I like him plenty, but rather than simply saying he's the best because everyone else thinks he is, I'd rather start a bit of discourse and hopefully introduce you to another mangaka who's going to give you a healthy dose of unease. I think Ito is so very successful because his horror isn't specific to Japan. It's not necessarily J-horror, and it has a very universal appeal, which is a virtue within itself. Masaaki hits closer to the plate in regards to being true Japanese horror, and his scope is much more focused on the small scale. Just don't watch the Fuan no Tane movie because it's really terrible. The series is so successful because it plays to the strengths of its format, much like Ito's works. And if you really like Japanese horror, I'd also like to recommend picking up a copy of J-Horror by David Callett. It's a very interesting book that goes through the history of horror cinema and the specific tropes indicative to Japanese horror. It's a great book for horror buffs who want to understand why we see certain recurring images in Japanese horror cinema. It also has a great list of recommendations that you should absolutely check out. I hope you enjoy the video, and I hope that you are willing to come back for more in the future.